Welcome back, Troglodytes, to a very special edition of the Trogly's Guitar Show. This is my all-time favorite model. If you ever ask me what my favorite Gibson guitar is, it is this guy, the 1983 Les Paul Spotlight Special. I am a huge fan of this model, and I used to have a pretty sizable collection for a 20-year-old back in the day, but unfortunately I had to sell them in order to put a down payment on my house, which makes it possible for me to produce this show. So was it worth it? I don't know yet. We'll find out. So the lore behind this model is that these maple tops were cut too short in the 50s and 60s and were tossed aside. When Gibson was moving from the Kalamazoo plant down to the Nashville one, since they were closing Kalamazoo, they found these pieces and they decided to assemble them together with a walnut strip down the middle to make it kind of look like a neck-through Les Paul. Now, do I 100% believe that these are from the 50s? No, I don't think so. I think it was just an interesting idea that they wanted to make a neck-through looking guitar, but have very beautiful pieces of wood. I mean, nobody's gonna know for sure, so there is speculation of why they did these. You will see the number 211 show up a lot as the official number of these guitars made. However, I am here to tell you that is false. Don't believe it. I think there's actually twice as much as that. There are actually some of these that were made in 1984. Now, I've only ever seen 2 of those 84s show up, and I believe the highest serial number was 84007, so that's just further proof that 211 is completely wrong. Now, since I am a huge fan of this model, I track every single one of these that show up. Every single one of these that's listed at a decent price, I usually buy it because I love these guitars. I just wish I could keep them all. My old goal in life used to be to buy every single Spotlight Special in existence and open up a museum with them. But through my years of tracking these, I found duplicate serial numbers. And you always find that one is in Antique Natural and one is in the other finish, Antique Sunburst. Now, is it possible that, oops, we messed up, we accidentally stamped it twice of the same number? Yes, that's possible, but I've seen enough examples of an Antique Natural and an Antique Sunburst have the same serial number. So I really do believe that there could be a duplicate for every serial number out there. Now, the Antique Natural ones sell for a huge premium over the Sunburst ones. Why? Because these are so much more fancy. These guys have brown binding on them, and that really makes these unique Les Pauls. You really can't find brown binding on anything else. But what's even better is you actually have the brown binding on the neck too. But you also have these cream pinstripes going up the side. So it really gives this guitar a really high-end, unique feel to it. And the other claim to fame for these natural ones is the natural colored wooden headstock. You can still see the wood grain underneath it, and they got special tuners with pearl tips. Now, that's not to diss on the Antique Sunburst ones. They are still nice looking guitars, they're just not as different and high-end looking as the Antique Naturals. Now, the Sunburst actually came in like 2 or 3 different hues. There's one that's kind of more of a tobacco sunburst look. It's got a darker exterior. And then there are some that are just kind of a regular burst, and then some that are just kind of a single color all over. I've had quite a few examples. I had an explosive quilt top one. That thing had a top that you couldn't believe. But honestly, in person, it didn't move much, so it wasn't really my favorite Spotlight. Now, my original collection, my big thing was I wanted to pick the guitars up. I didn't want them shipped. So I've been to Chicago, I've been to Boston, that was a really scary one. And I also flew down to Texas to pick one of these up. That one was really special, that was the second one made. But these are definitely my absolute favorite model that was ever made. So the specs for these are the same regardless of finish. You have a 3-piece top, Two of them are highly flamed or quilted maple pieces. You can see this one has a nice even flame. And then you have a walnut strip down the center. It's about 2 inches. Some of these guitars do have mahogany center strips. You also have the mahogany back and mahogany neck. Some of these will have a 3-piece neck, while others will have a 1-piece. This is actually my first 3-piece Spotlight Special, so the specs can vary. And let me tell you, this is the fattest neck I have ever had on a Spotlight Special. It almost has an R7 neck on it. It doesn't quite have the shoulder to it, but it's just about got the depth of it. They also have your typical rosewood fretboard. And of course, these come with the stock Tim Shaw PAF humbuckers. There were also very few Antique Sunbursts made with antique natural appointments. Big time collector Mike Slabowski has one of those. That is a really cool guitar, and there aren't very many of those out there. So that basically means it has the brown binding. Now Gibson has actually reissued these guitars, but they slaughtered them and made them look terrible. I would still like to review one someday just because it's a homage to such a beautiful model. But instead of making this strip down the center of the guitar the correct width, they decided to make it like run all the way down the guitar, and it's like 3 or 4 inches thick. I think that makes them look very ugly. But the one prototype for this guitar was done correctly. That was for sale a little while ago. I almost bought that one, but a different dealer beat me to that one. I guess the story behind that guitar is Gibson gave it to an employee as a bribe. They had heard he was planning on leaving and was hoping this would be like, hey, you're gonna stay with us, right? Here you go, beautiful guitar. I've actually owned this guitar for a few months now, and I've had a few people come over and everybody falls in love with this guitar, not because of how it looks, but it's just because of how resonant this guitar is. When you strum it, you can feel it in your soul. There is something about the Spotlight Special that is just absolutely fantastic. So while, yes, these are kind of collector's instruments, if you're a player and you're not scared to play this thing, you will love this guitar. Now these Spotlight Specials do have an ink stamp serial number. It's just not quite the format you're used to. These start with 83 for the year they were made in 83, and then they have their limited edition number. This one is 026, making it the 26th one made in 1983. Now let's kind of talk about the market value of these things. And I feel that I'm a little bit to blame for why these things are just so ridiculously expensive anymore. But when I first started buying these, I could pick these up all day long for like a little over $3,000. I remember paying $4,000 for one, thinking, that's a little bit much, but I have to have it. I must own every single one. But nowadays, you are lucky if you can find one cheaper than $5,000. And these have sold for more than $10,000 depending on the example. These are just getting very difficult to find because now that I've kind of surfaced some more photos of these guitars, and thanks to people like Mike Slabowski, that were educating people on this absolutely beautiful and gorgeous Les Paul that hardly anybody knew about before the internet. You can find all kinds of stories of people that have owned these their whole life, or they picked them up really cheap in like the late 80s, not knowing what it was, and finding out that they're just sitting on gold. There's just not a lot of these guitars out there, and I'm a little bit sad that the prices of these things are now kind of out of reach for most people. However, I think if you're going to pay over $10,000 for one of these, it better be absolutely mint condition, it better be a very low serial number, and it better have an amazing top, and it must be antique natural finish. The only ones that I would even consider paying that much for is like a prototype. Now the prototype Spotlight Special from the original run is very cool. It's actually for sale in Japan. I think translated it's like $14,000 US. If I was a guitar collector, I probably just would have bought it already, but I had a terrible experience buying from this guitar store before in Japan, so I would not suggest buying from them. But they do have a one-of-a-kind piece. That one has a really unique finish to it. You can hardly even tell it has that strip in the center. So that kind of tells you, at first Gibson might have been trying to hide that, but then they decided to embrace it. Now, one of the builders for Gibson, if you look inside the control cavity, sometimes you'll see the signature JL with a star. That is a signature of an employee who built a lot of these. I know he's posted on guitar forums because so many people were going, "What's JL? What's JL?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, that means I was building that guitar." I'd really like to interview that guy one day. But I always find the JL spotlights to be just a little bit more special because of that. As a fun fact, the Orville by Gibson brand, the one that actually says Orville by Gibson on it, did make, I think, 3 of these. I was tempted to buy one of those back in my collecting days, but I didn't know if I wanted to spend $4,500 on a guitar that was by Gibson and not Gibson. There was also an Epiphone Spotlight guitar. It was kind of like a Strat type thing. I'd like to review one of those one day too. This guitar weighs 9 pounds 9.2 ounces, and it features a Fat 50 styled neck. Alright, let's go ahead and go over the condition of this one. The face of the headstock has some very light scratches, but for the most part it is in good shape. The truss rod adjusts as it should, and you can see the beautiful wood grain underneath. That's what I really like about some of these antique natural ones, is they have like a wave pattern of wood grain. This one kinda has that going on. This is only the second antique natural I've been lucky enough to own. You can see the Les Paul model silkscreen is still on these, and the original truss rod covers for these don't say anything at all. You still have the original nut on this guitar. You can see the sides of the nuts still have the lacquer over them. And again, I really want to point out this brown binding. That's what makes these antique naturals so desirable, is because there's not a lot of Les Paul standards out there, at least from this era, or any era that have brown binding. But when you take a look straight on, you still have the cream binding lines on the inside, and that's what really makes this guitar stand out. I mean, this is just a phenomenal guitar to play. It feels so fancy to play, but yet it's still a Les Paul standard, so you're not scared to really just play this thing. The frets do show some minor wear, so this thing definitely was played. However, you don't have any huge divots, you just kind of have some flattening spots. Now this guitar looks great like this, but once you start getting it in the light just right, you can see some impression lines from picking scratches, light nicks and dings right there. So this is not mint condition. You can see some impression lines right there as well. But I think this would still fulfill most collectors' wants and wishes for a really nice spotlight special. It's hard to find a nice antique natural that hasn't aged to this pea yellow color. That's the only bad thing about natural finishes, is they don't always age as gracefully as we wish they would. Once again, beautiful flame top on this one. I don't think I've seen a quilted top natural one yet, but you see lots of quilts on the Antique Sunburst models. But again, right here where your arm rests, there are quite a few light impression marks. There's one right there as well, and by your control knobs. So it's not a mint condition guitar. But you do still have your original Tim Shaw PAFs, your original Nashville bridge, and tailpiece. Back of the headstock, your serial number is 83026, and you have your custom shop edition stamp. That means this guitar is part of a limited edition run. There's also one out there that says custom shop original. That means it was a one-off of some sort. You do still have your Made in USA stamp, but even your early prehistorics will have that. The only thing that's been changed on this guitar are these tuner tips. When I first got this guitar, somebody at some point in time changed the tips on these guitars, or maybe even the whole tuner, for the flip-out winding style. Now, I love flip-out winding tuners just as much as the next guy, but one of the big things for being an antique natural spotlight special are these pearl tips. But if I wouldn't have told you these are replacement tips, you probably would have never known. But this is why collectors won't hate me. I got the most accurate pearl tips I could. These pearl tips are from a 1980 335S. Those guitars, for whatever reason, they came stock with these pearl tips on them on a nickel-based Grover tuner. So what I did is I took those flip-out winding tuners off and I simply installed these vintage Gibson pearl tips on here. Now obviously these are from a little bit before this guitar's time frame, but that is the closest thing you could do. So you now have the correct pearl style tips on this guitar. Again, this is one of the few Les Paul Spotlight specials I've seen with a 3-piece mahogany neck. It's been a while since I've looked at my photo collage of all the Spotlights I've seen, but I think I've seen maybe 4 or 5 other ones that have the 3-piece neck. And now that I know that this one is such a fat neck profile, I'm wondering if all the 3-piece ones have that fat neck. And if that's true, I would definitely suggest going for the 3-piece ones if you like a slightly beefier neck. I mean, again, these are almost R7 territory. Now on the treble side, you do have a little bit of bubbling in the lacquer on the brown binding, but for the most part, it's nothing too extreme that you're going to have to worry about though. The back of your guitar is fairly clean. You can see the mahogany is very dancing. But again, I would still say this guitar is clean enough for most collectors. I mean, there are only so many Spotlight specials out there. I think this condition is definitely acceptable for most collectors. But again, you do have some impressions on the back, some light nicks and dings. This probably is one of my favorite Spotlights I've even had. The sides of the guitar, again, you have the thin binding in the cutaway. And there are a few light nicks and dings along the edges, as you can see right there. And these guitars did come stock with gold hardware. That's kind of something else that makes these unique. They are a Les Paul standard styled guitar with gold hardware. when usually you'll find like a chrome or a nickel in this time period. You also have a small ding right there, and just some average loving wear and tear. So all in all, this guitar is like 99% original. You have changed tuner tips. Worst case scenario, I mean, the tuners might have been changed, but however, they are the exact same Gibson branded Schaller tuners. So they fit the exact same footprint. Now we'll do a blacklight test on this guitar. As you can see, the top is glowing the way it should. It's kind of got a really green glow to it. That means this one's probably been displayed in the sun a little bit, but thankfully we don't have any finish touch-ups or major areas of wear. You can see right here there is a very small amount of clear coat wear. One of my favorite Spotlight specials had a big area of wear right there. The face of the headstock is also glowing the color we would like to see. Back of the headstock, once again, nothing to report here. No breaks, cracks, or repairs, thankfully. You've got a small little ding right here, but nothing too extraordinary. Then the back of the guitar is also glowing this perfect green color. I'm a big guy on restoring Spotlight specials. I used to have a huge stash of Tim Shaw PAFs, gold hardware from 80s customs, things like that, just in case I ever ran across a Spotlight that needed restored. However, the more and more I restored Spotlights, the more I was kind of sad with my collection. I started to embrace the changes that players made on these over the years because it really did add a character to this guitar. Now, all of my Spotlights, I kept a little journal with them. I wrote all my experiences and any changed parts that I restored, as well as, just the time of my trip going to pick it up. Now, when I sold my collection, a collector bought all of them, and then one of them went to Hong Kong, because that guy wanted it to give to his wife for giving birth to their first child. He wanted a spectacular example, and that was number 36, Antique Sunburst. That thing was mint condition, perfect. Unfortunately, the collector I then sold my collection to, trading some of those to Fretted Americana in order to get number 21, which was the guitar I really wanted for my 21st birthday. I guess the guy didn't want my journals with the guitars. I was a little saddened by that. I feel that they added some history to those guitars, and it would have been nice to have kept them in there and found them again one day. He had said he was going to send them to me in the mail, but I never did get them. Now, Spotlights could come in one of two cases. One of them is the Generation 3 chainsaw case like this one, and the other is the prehistoric Lifton reissue case. Most of them that you'll see will come in a chainsaw case though. This one's in pretty good shape, but it could use some cleaning. The back latch is broken, but the front two metal latches are still present. The interior color on this one is blue, and as you can see from the impression, it's likely that this is the original case to this guitar. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson Les Paul Spotlight Special in antique natural with a huge 50s neck profile, good luck. You're going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Realistically, though, I am going to price this one high, and you're going to have to convince me to sell it. Feel free to contact me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Troglys, Troglys. Thank you, Troglydites, for watching, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.